Blog Talk Radio. Bienvenidos a WEXP 88.3, donde lo hacemos mejor. Soy Evelyn Bernal y este es mi programa Entre Mujeres.
Hello, ladies. Happy Thursday. This is Evelyn Bernal, your host for Between Women. And we've all had those episodes where we had a fight with our couple regarding social media. Or you've probably been on the offended side, or you've probably been on the other side where your spouse was offended with you. This is really a new phenomenon for us older individuals, maybe like 30s, 40s, because as you remember, conflict between relationships always occur. However, they are occurring at another level because of the invasion of social media in our lives. And so let's talk about social media and relationships, and let's talk about the reality of social media and the impact it has. Now, I don't want to be like a negative Nelly, and I don't want to say that social media is entirely bad, but I do want to talk about the documented negative effects that social media can have as couples. And this is the reason. I believe that if you can understand the situation, you can always make an informed decision. Us women, we tend to be like over responsible. If something goes bad with our children, we put it on us most of the time. We feel like we start making an inventory, like, what did I do wrong? And I feel like with our relationships, we do the same thing. Like, we're immediately assuming that maybe if we could have done it better, or maybe if we would have, haven't said this or not done this. And we take a lot of responsibility, and it's good to be responsible. It's just not healthy when we are assuming most of the responsibility and not really being in tune to things that are kind of occurring in our relationship. And we're not in tune with them, but also we sanction ourselves for feeling a certain way when sometimes those feelings are trying to tell us something, right? And so I believe that the best thermometer in a relationship is how you're feeling. So they say that if you are a person who's constantly feeling upset in your relationship, it's telling you something. It's like somebody's needs are not being met. And so it's a very abstract concept because sometimes we don't really know what it is. We just perceive it. Same thing with social media. How many of us have been labeled as, oh, you're crazy, there's nothing going on? But let's talk about it and be real. There are concerns about social media in couples today. I don't want to demonize social media. There are healthy aspects, and we're going to talk about them. But the reality is that there is also concerns about it. So let's jump right into it. Let's talk about how social media impacts intimate relationships. Well, if you look at the studies which are newly emerging because of this new phenomenon, you will see that social media is linked to increased surveillance, jealousy, and extramarital affairs. I'm sorry, I can't talk today. And divorce in intimate partner relationships. And why is that? This is a really bold statement. However, when used appropriately, social media can actually be good for a couple. Because think about it, like, social media closes the gap of distance, right? And so before, if you were living like in another state or in another city, or if one of you had to go on a business trip, in reality, there was no visual contact with the individual, right? But now, thanks to all the advancements, technology, and social media, it actually facilitates time together. Like, okay, well, we can't, not only can we talk on the phone, but we can spend time together, right? We could Skype. You can build a stronger connection. You could share. You could display, like, the affection on social media. And you can also use social media to facilitate time for each other. In fact, it might even help you to build a stronger connection if it is used appropriately. And so what happens with social media is that physical location, time, and distance are less likely to be a challenge for couples because of the presence that you can have in each other's lives through social media. So there clearly, like I said before, I'm not demonizing social media. There is obviously pros and cons that are integrated with social media in an intimate relationship. And so what is still kind of unclear is what this means for couples. And so it's important that we talk about the potential negative implications and normalize kind of some of the feelings that we have over social media with our kind of demystify it. Again, all with the purpose of being informed and being educated of a real issue that the majority of us have to face every day, unless you're like that rare couple that neither of you have social media. And so I talked about when I started is that it has been proven that social media is linked to intrusion and jealousy. Well, what happens with social networking sites is that they create a level of uncertainty within the romantic partnerships. And so what happens when we're feeling like, this is kind of this, you're feeling uncertain about this individual on your partner's social media. And so what do? The natural tendency is to ask a question and be like, let me check this out. Who is this? And so social media, the uncertainty that social media creates makes us want to kind of do a little bit of surveillance. I use the word monitoring better. And so thus, the monitoring, when we start going through stuff, it creates jealousy between couples. And so studies are showing that when people in relationships use social media, there's always going to be a level of uncertainty in the partnership. And this uncertainty causes feelings of jealousy, and it actually can cause intense feelings of jealousy. And so there was actually a study done, and what one of these studies found was that when one person had, in the relationship, had strict privacy settings on their social media accounts, the other person in the relationship reported feeling like increased jealousy, anger, disgust, and hurt. Think about it, if your spouse, if your significant other, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, etc., has strict settings on their social media, you never have access to it, tell me that doesn't kind of make you feel curious. I mean, what are they up to? What's all this privacy about? What's all this secrecy about? So then the other person, like I said previously, because we have lack of information, the other person is left to assume, and we usually assume negatively. But you are not alone. You are not being crazy, and you are not being irrational by experiencing the feelings of jealousy, anger, disgust, and hurt, because in this study, actually, these other individuals reported feeling in the same way. There was actually another study at the Australian University, and they focused on intrusion, jealousy, and Facebook use. And so the study, they looked at Facebook intrusion, which is when you go into your partner's Facebook excessively and you monitor it. And so what they found was that when you are extremely intrusive of your partner's Facebook, it was linked to relationship dissatisfaction, because actually, monitoring the spouse's Facebook page led to jealous cognitions, which means you were having jealous thoughts, because obviously, I don't know a man like that today. And I'm just saying because I am a person, obviously, with I am a person in a relationship with a man. I am a heterosexual female, so for me, saying a man applies. This would apply. It applies to any relationship with any sexual orientation. And so if I am looking, I have not seen one guy who has strictly all men on their Facebook because they feel like their woman's going to be mad, or, maybe they exist. I haven't really encountered them. Obviously, our spouses are going to have the opposite sex or the same sex. And what's going to happen is we're going to start intruding. We're going to monitor them. and we're going to get to jealous thoughts, right? That's kind of a given. And so it's very clear that there is definitely a connection between social media use and jealousy. It's clear. And so some of it, I guess, like, you know, I'm all about, like, you're accountable for your feelings, but I will tell you this. If you are feeling like insecure or jealous about social media, you have kind of a leg to stand on per se, because there is research to demonstrate that there can be potential negative consequences about social media in couples. And so, as you know, having not as you know, I'm sorry, let me retract. So, like I just stated, there is a reason for us feeling dissatisfied, jealous, or uncertain regarding social media, because the connection is clear. Therefore, if we look at the statistics, 25% of romantic partners involved in infidelity use Facebook to communicate with a rival partner. So it's this whole new set of social networking, and 1/4 of them use Facebook for the infidelity. So obviously, we're not saying that it causes it, but what we are saying is that it's definitely involved in the mix. And for us, older generation, we see that we didn't really deal with social media in the same way when we were growing up. It was different for us, actually, because everything had to be more in person. You had to have that awkwardness of saying things to a person, to their face, and having to deal with the uncomfortableness of saying something and then looking at their response or being rejected. I mean, even in letter, even if you wrote a letter to someone, it had to be in person. Like, somebody had to go deliver it so that person could tell you, like, oh, they made this face or that face. But today, there isn't that factor. Like, it facilitates itself for a little more risky behavior because you're not really seeing a person. But the reality is 25% of romantic partners involved in being unfaithful use Facebook to communicate with the rival partner. And so if you look at the most damaging things to a marriage or to a relationship, the second most damaging problem is an extramarital affair. For those of us who have lived it on either side, you understand that whether you are the person that had the affair or whether you are the person who was on the other side of, your spouse having an affair, we all understand that this was a very, very devastating event. And the reality is that social media changes the way affairs are initiated and conducted. The most obvious way is like through social media's ability to connect past loves, and it's a virtual playground for relationship betrayal to occur. And so sometimes, because it's social media and you really don't have to be looking at the person, the reality is that sometimes infidelity is occurring with somebody that the person hasn't met in person. Because obviously you have that capacity through social media. And so they haven't seen this person. Does that make it worse, bad? I don't know. But what we do know is that even when the person is not present, it is definitely possible that they can have an emotional affair. And sometimes these people never meet, but they still suffer, relationships still suffer the same negative outcomes related to infidelity online as they do offline. Like, there's still that big factor of betrayal, and it is still as devastating. Emotional affairs are as devastating as a physical affair. So we looked at some studies, and the study suggested that when there is no in-person contact online, the affairs can be just as devastating as the real world, because obviously what happens, they trigger feelings of insecurity, anger, and jealousy. And so social media is more frequently becoming the vehicle for infidelity to occur, which may or may not involve sexual contact, but rather say virtual sexual contact via social media networks. This is a lot of information. I want to give a little shout out to you, my listeners. I know you guys have been faithful week after week. I've gotten some shout outs here, on the side of the shows. I want to give you my information in case you want to reach out to me. First of all, you can call in. We have the ability to get guests calling in. And the number for a guest calling in is 516-387-1814. If you have any questions, we will be glad to answer them. This is more than questions. This is also a discussion because this is a fairly new phenomenon to all of us. Maybe the new generations, and it's probably just as uncomfortable for them, but for them it's going to be a little more normative. For us, this is a whole different ball game of when we were growing up, and like I said, still having to write handwritten letters, and you had to basically be present to be active in a person's life. That reality is not there anymore with social media. You could stay in contact via pictures, and so if you want to be part of this discussion, call us. Again, the number is 516-387-1814. You can also find me on Facebook as Evelyn Bernal Life Coach. Send me a shout out, send me an inbox. I will be happy to consider any thoughts that you have for future topics. And in general, it'd be good to hear from you. It's always good to hear from other women. We give each other perspective. We discuss things that maybe people feel like we don't know where you're coming from. I've had that experience before where I have friends call me and be like, what do you think about this? Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think I'm not wrong? Because we feel rather alone in the situation. We feel like we're the only individuals that are going through this. And so I definitely want to be a point of reference for you if you have something that you want to kind of share with us. And so now that you know how to contact me, and so what we see is that social media is more frequently, like I said, becoming vehicle for infidelity. And the reality is that social media is impacting divorce in America. There was a report that, 33% of divorce filings in the United States mention Facebook and use Facebook as a vehicle for couples. 80% of lawyers gathered evidence for divorce proceedings from social media outlets. And so to help avoid problems in the divorce related to social media, more and more couples are beginning to hire lawyers. Can you believe that? There's people that now are creating social media prenups. I mean, it's a valid point. So they create these and outline the expectations of couple engagements on social media, and it's a legal document created to protect the people in the relationship from possibly being exploited and shamed over multiple social media arenas. I mean, geez, we're living in a new day and age. I don't remember my parents having to deal with these kinds of issues. And so it's important that we are as informed as possible. I'm a strong believer that if you have information, that you are able to make an informed decision. Otherwise, think about it. Think about how you feel like going through your partner's social media. Think about those negative feelings, and what do we do with those? Like we're always wondering, like, am I wrong? Am I not wrong? Like we obviously have those questions, and sometimes we have nowhere to bounce those off on because we in reality, like, there's lack of information and we don't know. And then unfortunately, it's kind of awkward sometimes to have these conversations with our couples because we're feeling like, how am I gonna be perceived? Am I gonna be perceived like I'm being controlling? Am I gonna be perceived like this is crazy, like I am invading the other person's privacy? And all of those little factors kind of get in the way, and so we don't address it. But unfortunately, just because you ignore something, it doesn't mean that it's going to go away, unfortunately. And so it's something that we definitely need to talk about. There are obviously potential dangers to social media and its use for couples. So it's difficult to define social media etiquette for couples because every couple is different. Like I've heard couples say, it doesn't bother me. I don't go through social media. And then there's other couples that say, well, it definitely bothers me. And then I've heard other couples say or other individuals say, like this is a no-no for me. In fact, I've seen couples just opt to having like joint social media accounts. The only thing about that is that in reality, if your spouse wants to have a different social media account, like what stops them? This is all virtual. It's not like we have the ability to track all the information. And so I guess the best policy is probably to have an open communication with our couples. I feel like there should be some rules around it, or maybe not rules, maybe expectations, but the expectations should be obviously between you and your spouse. It all depends on your comfort level. Like I might say, I can stay here and be like, well, you guys should all have joint accounts, or none of us should have social media, because obviously that would fix the problem. But that's not a reality. It's not a reality for a lot of us because others have different approach to social media. So in general, I think the rule of thumb is always communicate. Like communicate what it is that you feel is acceptable and you feel is not acceptable. It's not a black and white conversation. And the reason it's not a black and white conversation is because how do you put rules around social media? Like, okay, we're going to discuss who we can friend, but it's different. Like if we say, we're just going to friend people that we know. Well, sometimes the people that we know, like the network gets really big. Some of us know a lot of people while our spouses don't know that many people. And that way it's difficult to be concise. But whether you have social media or not, I think the most valuable thing that we can have, the most valuable skill that we can utilize in a relationship is the ability to talk and communicate. There are families that yell a lot, but nobody listens. Like they yell, but they really don't say anything. Nobody's listening to each other. And so when we don't learn to communicate in our relationship, it does kind of set the platform for issues in our relationship, especially when we are inadequate in kind of expressing what we are feeling and what our standards are. And so next week, I wanna keep talking a little bit about this topic. It's definitely very interesting. This is just a little like tidbit. Next week, we are going to be taking question and answer regarding social media and couples. And so if you want to send your question, if you don't want to call in live, you can always find me on Evelyn Bernal Life Coach on Facebook and Instagram, or you could also call in the guest line, which I'll be providing at the end of the show. And I really appreciate you listening to me. This is kind of I felt kind of heavy talking about this. This is something that is a reality. It's something that is creating issues for a lot of couples. So it'd be important to kind of find ways to turn this around and use social media as something that is going to connect us further. So I will see you next week, and we will continue talking about this topic, the power of a click, and it's about the social media etiquette for couples. This is Evelyn Bernal, and this is your show, Between Women.